The Women's Union continued its fight for temperance, but it was no longer just a women's issue. In 1893, it was a group of Protestant businessmen from Ohio who formed the Anti-Saloon League. They were the ones who would steer the movement all the way to national prohibition. Their objective was to destroy the liquor trade forever. Like the temperance crusaders before them, they had a powerful sense of mission. But their campaign was run like a commercial enterprise. Money was mailed by supporters in monthly subscriptions. The League had regional offices staffed by salaried professionals fully committed to their work. The Anti-Saloon League realized the power of the press. Every month, tons of dry literature was sent out to bombard wet America. The men of the Anti-Saloon League drew much of their support from the church, but their success lay in their political skills. They pledged their support and that of their subscribers to whichever candidate promised to make his state dry. But there was one man who would make a real difference. He was known as the Dry Boss, and he was the ultimate operator. His name was Wayne Wheeler.
Wayne Wheeler was a graduate of Oberlin College, which was, of course, a Calvinist college, and it was constantly on the vanguard of the fight against liquor. But he was also an entrepreneur of a very special kind. He discovered very soon, when he joined the Anti-Saloon League, that he was really a born manipulator, that what his life was all about was being behind the scenes, having the real power, not necessarily showing it, because he was never even president of the Anti-Saloon League. He was their legal advisor, but he was the most important behind-the-scenes figure in the whole of America.
Wheeler was effective because he was subtle and ambitious. He was a skillful political manipulator, but his cause appeared pure and above corruption. When his men said they were struggling for the soul of the nation, hundreds of thousands believed him. To be anti-liquor was to be for liberty and for freedom, for equality and for Christian values. In 1908, at the Ohio elections, Wheeler first turned the cogs of power. His opponents were formidable. Ohio had a huge brewing industry which argued that dry laws would cripple the state's hop farmers and put thousands out of work. But Wheeler was not intimidated. He badgered leading citizens and got the clergymen of Ohio to acclaim the driest party from their pulpits. Then he looked to the candidates and guaranteed them campaign money, campaign workers, and votes if they spoke out for prohibition. Democrat or Republican, it did not matter, as long as they voted against alcohol. It worked. The first time in a generation, the traditionally Republican state voted Democrat and dry.
This is a moral country. A legislator who votes for liquor or against prohibition votes for vice, sin, and crime. Never again will any political party ignore the protests of the church and moral forces of the state.
The clamor for prohibition was now something no politician could ignore. Out of panic, out of conviction, they jumped on the bandwagon. By 1912, 9 states were dry, with over half the population living under dry laws. But the cities were still wet. Detroit, America's fastest growing city, gave the drys unexpected hope. Henry Ford, the industrial giant, was a temperance fanatic. Ford's assembly lines were new to the world in 1914, and Ford believed he needed a new type of worker. The workers at the Ford plant were to be sober and industrious, and their social lives were to be as regulated as the factories they worked in. Al Bardelli was an Italian immigrant. When he arrived in Detroit, he went to work for the Ford Motor Company.
If they drank, they couldn't come in. They couldn't bring it in because, well, if they'd ever catch them, you get fired right away. If they'd ever see you drinking or smell liquor on you, you got fired. Where I was at was glass. You could cut your neck off handling glass if you're drunk. We had one guy come in drunk. They fired him. But if it wasn't for his mother come in there and begged the superintendent to reinstate him, he never got back. But he didn't drink after that. That's the first case I remember when I was president of the glass plant representing the union. That's the first case I heard. He come in drunk. He didn't drink on a job. He came in drunk. He got fired.
Ford was a new breed of prohibitionist. He spoke out for abstinence, not in the name of moral virtue, but industrial efficiency. He wanted productive workers who thought his way.
These men of many nations must be taught American ways, the English language, and the right way to live.
The homes of those who worked for Ford were routinely checked by his sociological department. To qualify for the legendary $5 day, a worker had to satisfy the company that his wages were not being wasted on riotous living.
This is the human product we seek to turn out. And as we adapt the machinery in the shop to turning out the kind of automobile we have in mind, so we have constructed our educational system with a view to producing the human product we have in mind.
Alcohol had one other drawback for Ford. If his workers squandered their wages on liquor, they wouldn't have the money to buy his cars.
I had a Ford coupe, and we had a superintendent in the building. If he didn't buy a Ford car, he'd fire you. He come to me. I had to show him my owner's card, or I got fired. I said, listen, I got it at home. I'll bring it in tomorrow. Don't you carry it with you? I said, I got the bus to come here. I said, a streetcar, rather, to come to work.
When industrial moguls like Ford and like the Rockefellers and the DuPonts threw their weight and money behind temperance, the prohibitionists were given new force. With their support, the Anti-Saloon League and Wheeler looked to a national ban on alcohol. But the big brewers were getting stronger all over America, too. They were consolidating their operations and finding ways to beat the local bans against alcohol. Even in the dry states, the lure of beer would never go away.
Backsliding had always been a problem with the liquor issue. People would swear off liquor and then think that it would be nice to have a drink again. States would decide that prohibition would be good, and then shortly thereafter decide that having a drink would be nice once in a while. The prohibitionists believed that if their prohibition was added to the Constitution, it could not be simply repealed.
In 1913, Wayne Wheeler moved his office from Ohio to Washington, D.C., and formally launched the drive to make prohibition an amendment to the United States Constitution. At the League's National Convention, Wheeler spoke like a messiah.
As Moses said to the children of Israel that they should go forward, just so the time has come for the moral forces of this great nation to march on against the last bulwarks of the enemy. Like the muttering of a great storm, you can hear the determined demands from every quarter to attack the enemy all along the line for national constitutional prohibition.
His confidence was high, but to amend the Constitution, he needed another 39 states to vote dry.